What's up, friends? Glad you guys are joining me here on the Challenging Conversations show, brought to you by the Edify Podcast Network. Challenging Conversations is a show designed to empower and teach you how to speak the truth in love when discussing controversial topics with someone who might not hold a biblical worldview. Let me ask you this question. What was the last thing you thought was so beautiful that it took your breath away? Maybe it was looking at your wife, maybe your kids, or being out in nature. There is so much in the world that is beautiful and captivating, yet we often miss the beauty because we're either too busy to pay attention to it or have slipped into a state where we are unmindful of what beauty is. To help us recapture the wonder and splendor of beauty in our lives, I've invited my good friend, Dr. Tim Willard, the author of the brand new book, Beauty Chasers, Recapturing the Wonder of the Divine, to help revitalize our hearts and minds as we become more endearing to beauty. Tim, my beautiful friend, thanks for coming on Challenging Conversations.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
You saw what I did there, right?
Friend.
You know, with the whole concept today about beauty and referring to you as a beautiful man.
Yeah, so, I appreciate that.
Now,
and you're beautiful too.
I see. Yeah, I wasn't like, fishing for a compliment, but I appreciate that you said that. Now, people listening and not watching us, they're just gonna have to take my word for it, okay?
Yeah,
that you're a beautiful man. So,
and you too.
And me too. We're all beautiful people. So hey, man, I gotta say, I know you and I in our line of work as authors, and you, of course, being a ghostwriter, and you're like, I always tell people, you're a legit writer. I'm just kind of a part-time writer. I'm just trying to figure this whole thing out. But so we get to read a lot of books, and you and I both enjoy, and we've recommended different books that we've been reading to, either what you're referring to, and some of your research stuff, and as well as mine. But I got to say, when I was reading your latest book now, Beauty Chasers, man, I was seriously highlighting like the whole book because it was that good. And then I'm thinking, I didn't know Tim was this smart, but it really opened my eyes to a lot of things. And just to tell my audience, you studied the life in books of C.S. Lewis for many years when you were in Oxford. So you've investigated a lot of these different aspects that through time, I think that you've really captured in your own language, as an originalist, some really new nuances of how to address this whole concept of beauty. And I love the title, Beauty Chasers. So of course, let's set it up by asking you this question. Tell our audience a little bit about this new book called Beauty Chasers and why you wrote it.
Yeah, it's a good question. And just like you said, over the years, like the more you're in something for a long period of time, you start thinking, and you go down different little tributaries of research, and you're thinking through things. You look at how people in the past have described beauty. And for me, I was looking at C.S. Lewis, specifically his works, mostly his fiction and some of his nonfiction, and just looking at the language of beauty I thought that he used. And when I started really pulling things apart, I noticed him using beauty kind of like this in a language, but like it was like this. You have or experience beauty in your life, and then the progression goes like this. You kind of have an aesthetic gasp, right? You see something beautiful, or you experience something beautiful, and you go, wow, that was amazing. And it gives you goosebumps, or, you start, your mind comes awake, your soul kind of comes awake. And then that's what Lewis would refer to as joy. He had a really interesting way, I think, of positioning joy. And then joy for him then gives birth to longing. And so as I started looking at that and looking at even some of the ways that non-Christian writers and thinkers looked at beauty and or like aspects of beauty, like that kind of haunting feeling you get that you can't explain when something is kind of wonderful or numinous feeling. There are a lot of writers, even atheists, who leave room for that kind of mysterious wonder in nature and in art and in just life in general. So all those things kind of coalesced into really me thinking through, like, how are we thinking of beauty as Christians? And a lot of times, and this is what, and maybe you can relate to this, I hear Christians say, well, true beauty only comes from within. And I mean, my own experience doesn't bear that out. Like, beauty is so huge. It's in every aspect of life. So I'm like, well, that's not totally true. It is true to an extent, but not totally true. And then I think the secular world wants us to look at beauty more as aesthetic things related to art or even design or sculpture or whatever. So it's kind of relegated to the elite minds, right? To academics.
Right.
And then you kind of start feeling funny because you're like, well, I'm not an academic. I can't really understand aesthetic theory. And it is very confusing. So we kind of leave it alone. And we have like a baseline of quote unquote aesthetics. So I want to revive this idea that beauty is something much bigger than mere aesthetics, and also something more expansive than just something that's within your spirit, which is still true. But if God Himself is beauty itself, right? If He's beauty, then what does that mean for our lives as Christians? And so that was really the impetus of the book and how things started coming along for me. And then after that, it was a couple years of just reflecting on our time as a family when we lived in Oxford and in London, and then coming back to America and kind of like just hashing it out. Like, what does beauty mean to me in my everyday?
Very good. And I love the title Beauty Chasers, because that's more or less, kind of in a fanciful way where, like, hey, there's so much beauty, like you said, like inward, outward, within people, within relationships, within food, within God's creation, and we can
Yeah.
chase that, you know what I mean, and recapture that type of wonder. So I know, like you said, phrases like even beauty's is in the eyes of the beholder, right? So then
Hmm.
it's subjective. In some cases, we can say that may be true to some extent. And you talk
Hmm.
about in your book that beauty is hard to define. But what are some
Yeah.
ways to help our audience go about describing beauty? Obviously, starting with God Himself, who is beauty.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you kind of hit it on the head because people, I think they resist even talking about beauty because they're like, well, what is it? And even Plato in the Symposium doesn't define beauty. He just, through the dialogues, he just kind of describes it,
Mhm.
right? And its effect on us. And that's kind of how Lewis comes about it. Augustine talks about it. I think the thinkers like Aquinas, they kind of gave it more parameters where they would talk about symmetry and pattern. And that's good. But one of my favorite kind of phrases I came across was actually from a couple different theologians, one a Greek Orthodox and one an Italian, I think, Catholic. But this is how they referred to beauty. They said, beauty is an event.
Mm.
And I was like, wow,
Mm.
I never heard that before. And so when people ask me, Tim, how do you describe it? I say, well, it's super hard to describe, and I don't really like to describe it. But if I had to say or describe it in some way or define it as you're asking, I would say beauty is an event. Well, then what does that mean? Well, this one theologian says that it's basically the idea of the infinite pushing through into the finite. So it's those things, it's those what C.S. Lewis would talk about, the God light in our world. Like you see something, you're like, whoa, okay, that is from heaven, right? And you've heard it, you've probably heard it many millions of times. Everybody's heard it. My wife has even said it to me when we're at the beach. They're like, how can someone look at a sunset and think there is no God? Well, I would say, it's kind of a trite thing to say for all of us, and I've said it myself,
Mhm.
but there's truth in that, because you look at that wonder, you're like, man, that is something that's extraordinary. And so I think when you're looking at maybe defining it for yourself and go, well, Tim, how can I chase beauty practically? I think we're just looking for God light in our lives, the things like the charms of life. Even Lewis, one of the ways that he actually learned more about beauty was from his friend Arthur Greaves,
Yeah.
who really taught him to appreciate the charms of life, like a well ordered dinner table, or a nicely ordered garden, or a nice armchair with books beside it and a candle or whatever, like something, things that we do every day that you're like, you love, like most people love, um, that can also be something as beautiful. So it's those kind of charms of life, or those extraordinary moments, or even like, dew on a blade of grass, or caught in a spider web. And that's how Jonathan Edwards really got captured by beauty with God. And it was interesting, you mentioned it earlier too, about how God is beauty itself. Jonathan Edwards, when he talks about God as beauty, he's talking about the characteristics of God, his character and his power together as being the most excellent. Like it's his excellencies that make him the ultimate good and the ultimate beauty, the ultimate idea of beauty or ideal. And that's what kind of Lewis gets at, even in his famous
Mm.
essay, "The Weight of Glory." He gets at that when he starts talking about nature. Um, so those are some of the ways I think if you can like kind of pull back a little bit and look at your life. Like right now, I'm looking out my window as I'm talking to you, and I love doing it because we're talking about beauty, and I'm seeing the light coming through the forest and lighting up leaves. And if you can stop and pause for a little bit, you can really see glimpses of just small wonder in every day. I mean, I've got roses out here. I've got squirrels going back and forth and bunnies. I mean, I've got a little, everything is like that, those charms of life that Lewis loved. And I can experience that every day if I just open my eyes and
Mm.
take the time to do it.
Yeah, I think it's true. That's why I was saying in the opening. A lot of times we're not paying attention, and then as a result, we become unmindful to what beauty
Yeah.
is. And like you said, they are the charms of life. These little things. Just recently, I was looking at my wife sitting with our youngest daughter, who's 12, and they're just chatting, and they're both knitting together, right,
Yeah.
separate, and
Yeah.
they're watching something on TV and just taking a break together. And earlier they had baked something for one of my daughter's friends who was feeling sick. That's just beautiful. The interaction between a mother and a daughter and the time they spend together. And then as a father and husband coming in, just seeing that, in front of me saying, these are two people that I love dearly and that are
Yes.
beautiful to me. And God, you are beautiful in this, in giving this, and the marriage, and then what comes from a marriage. Like you're right, and we could just go on our day and sometimes miss it. But
Yeah.
those are beautiful things. I would also say donuts, Tim, are beautiful. Amen. Okay.
My daughters would agree with you.
Yeah,
Yes.
donuts are amazing. So, but what I want to do along the lines of what you said is I'm going to show here a quote, and I want to read it and have you respond. I thought this was very
Okay.
fascinating in the Beauty Chasers of your book. It says, you write, we fail to open our eyes and hearts to beauty's full significance in this world. We will rob ourselves of God's voice in our lives. Relegating beauty to the spirit of a person removes its profound touch from our daily experience. It quiets its voice so much so that we will soon forget what the voice of beauty sounds like. Unpack that for a minute, what you were saying in that part of your book.
Yeah. So I think the pace of life in America and really the advanced world really it takes us out and actually I think brutalizes our time as human beings. We are Lewis referred to. He had this phrase where he really was thankful for his father for not buying a car because it kept him from this like this disease of rushing about because he believed that motor cars and those things annihilated space. And so every day we're caught in the rat race, so to speak. Everybody has to deal with it. Unless you're removed yourself from society in a way where you can have a quiet life, um, you are battling or in tension with the push and pull of modern culture. It just is from your screen that's pulling you in, having you scroll to your television to the news cycle. Everything has this like push and pull on your life, and it distracts you. It is a distraction. And so I feel like if we can just slow down a little bit and pull ourselves back from that and figure out rhythms or cadences in our life
Mm-hmm.
that will help us remain a little, and I don't mean like we got to be like hermits or anything like that, but maybe we do. But if you can slow yourself down a little bit, I feel like that's a way where you can begin again to reawaken the wonder in your life. And I feel like even the church is a little bit to blame for this. We've kind of, I mean, especially the Protestant evangelical church, and you and I have talked about this just offline about how we kind of aren't really offering people who come to church anything that's different, anything that's transcendent or divine.
Yeah.
We kind of offer them a Coldplay concert packaged in a strip mall kind of ordeal where we come in, we're seeing a production, even, smoke machines, and we have a snappy pastor up there giving, a 20-minute lesson, and we head out. And we're done. We're out. And I've asked people. I've been doing this kind of this book tour, an old fashioned road trip book tour this summer, talking to people, and I'm like, how many of you guys have really found yourself, pros, laying face down before the Lord in your worship services? And I think I had one person raise their hand,
Yeah.
and they're like, I'm like, that's a sign of the
Yeah.
lack of wonder in our worship experiences, and we become kind of consumeristic with it. So I feel like even that loudness and that annihilation of space and thought has kind of crept into the church as well. So that's kind of what I'm getting at. I want us to reawaken our senses, and not only your eyes physically to see the world, but the eyes of your heart also to take what you see and be able to reflect upon it, and how that what you experience in your life, just like what you said with your daughter and your wife. Like, one of the path I have like 10 pathways in the book to help
Right.
people reawaken beauty, and one of those is togetherness. And I think I get goosebumps talking about it, because I think community and togetherness is one of the beautiful ways that God has wired us to actually, how the Chariots of Fire, he's like, I feel God's pleasure.
Yeah.
That famous line. I feel like we feel his pleasure when we're together, because he himself is a community of being, right? So one of the ways that we can experience beauty is through community and through our families being together. And that's actually, you were saying you see that love. You were describing your togetherness in the context of a love relationship. And what's really cool is a couple, Karl Barth, a theologian, Simone Weil, a French philosopher, Christian. They both describe beauty as God's reaching hand through nature and God's smiling face to us. And the idea is that he is pursuing us through beauty. And so
Mm.
it is this beautiful thing. I like to describe it kind of as like the beauty of the natural world as God's bouquet of love to us, like a reminder of him wooing us to him. So that's kind of what I'm getting
Yeah.
at. The idea, slow down enough to see with your eyes and to see with the eyes of your heart this wooing nature of God.
So when it comes to your personal life, and I like to ask this question a lot, especially on this topic, because we can get so analytical or philosophical. Obviously, me
Yeah.
as a Christian apologist, sometimes you're looking at, facts, and you're trying to work through a lot of people's misnomers of things or misconstrued ideas, and you want to try to
Hmm.
bring a logical and consistent argument, to the table. And sometimes you can miss, and you and I certainly have talked about this, and I've talked about this with a lot of people in the Christian faith. I had a lunch meeting with a pastor recently, and he says, Jay, don't take offense to this. He says, but oftentimes apologists are just so intellectually, deep, that it's just like, goes over people's heads.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, that's not as creative, maybe, perhaps. And of course it is in terms of logic and truth and God's order and design, but it misses
Yeah.
out in personality. And so I always like to ask, people in their line of work, well, what about you? When was a time that, the beauty of God, like, really just, hit you hard, Tim? I mean, you've studied C.S. Lewis, you've referenced him several times.
Yeah.
Fantastic, one of the most gifted, most amazing writers, clearly the number one in the 20th century.
Mm.
But what was a time that really, when when you were confronted, if you will, with God's beauty, and it changed your life and gave you a clearer perspective on life in general?
Yeah, I love that question. I have a very specific answer or a story actually. So we had just arrived in England. It was some September. I started my study in October of that year, and then a friend of a friend. I had done actually a ghostwriting project with the Palau family, the evangelists, for his younger son actually, and he had a friend. He goes, Tim, I have a friend who's a hoteler. That's what they call people in England who own hotels, a hoteler. Um, and he said, and he would love to, he would love for you to come out to the lakes, and that's the Lake District in England, and it's an idyllic place. It's gorgeous, natural beauty, just times a thousand. And some of my favorite writers, lived there back in the day, like William Wordsworth and Coleridge, John Ruskin, Beatrix Potter. So I was very excited to take the family up there. And so he invited us to come up for Thanksgiving, obviously because they don't have Thanksgiving. And so we spent that whole weekend, a long weekend, up at the lakes, and it was kind of rainy. I mean, I love weather, so England for me was like a revelation. I just loved it. It was how you would experience it, in a movie or something. And so we were at the hotel, and the lake is literally right outside this gorgeous lake, and but behind us is one of the hills. The lakes are surrounded by these they call them mountains, but they're here they'd be called hills.
Yeah.
Big hills, but so I took a footpath up and got to the top, and there was an outcropping of rocks and a bunch of sheep, chewing the grass and and so I'm up there, and just it's super quiet. It's spitting rain, and I just sat on that outcropping of rocks and for a while. It was it was coming on dusk, and the previous 6.5 years of my life, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, pursuing writing full time, and it was hard. I mean, I was in seminary, I was running, and here I was in England with only one thing to do, and that was to do my research, and everything had fallen away. Like, to get to that point, we had to sell our cars, we sold our house, we sold a lot of our belongings, just for that opportunity to go study. And it was one of those times in your life where you kind of let your shoulders roll back, and you're like, man, I'm exhausted. And you're like, man, I feel like I've left part of me that used to be here. And it was a moment where I teared up, and I actually, it was like one of those quiet weeping moments when you're
Mhm.
by yourself. And I just felt the Lord speak to me of like, just dive into this, Tim. Just be here, be in this moment. Let yourself be in this moment, and understand that I am here and I'm with you. I'm with you in all of this. And it was a moment where I was experiencing literally the natural wonder and glory of God through his creation in that moment. But it was also a moment of 2 years of living with my young family. My girls were all under 5 when we started that journey. And we were, living in Oxford, this little small village outside of Oxford, but we walked everywhere. So life for us really slowed down. And I can't emphasize this enough. You don't know that you're annihilating space and time until you're outside of your normal routine. You're like, whoa, when did I get in such a hurry? And you're like, and where's God in all this? And so it was one of those moments where it was a recalibration for me. And we still refer to those years living in England as our Oxford rhythm, because it was during our time of study. And this is, 6 and 7 years ago now, where those years still impact us in our decisions for, for example, what we let our girls do, how many
Yeah.
things we let them be involved in, what we do as parents, like how we are going to, parent through them now wanting, iPhones, and that whole journey of screens and distraction. And we always go back to those moments of revelation, really, of like, wow, we have kept beauty and wonder, at arm's length, because we've gotten so fast and have gotten in such a hurry in our lives. So that was I would say that's one of the moments I remember the most, and most recent moments where it really had an impact on me, and I just changed. And I wouldn't say I had changed to go a completely other direction, but it was almost like I refound myself, if you know what I mean. Where you're like, what am I doing? Like, what was I doing in Atlanta? I mean, it was good times in
Yeah.
Atlanta, and I had a lot of opportunity, but you realize that you concede a lot of things when you're pursuing things like your job or your career or academics, whatever it is. And you're like, whoa, I have like really taken this thing that was special to me, which is my relationship with the Lord, and or how I worship him, and that has kind of moved over here, and now I'm almost bereft. I want it back. So that was one of those moments for me.
Yeah, it really hits to what you talk about in the book, Tim, where you say, when you're referring to Tolkien's most beautiful lines comes from the Fellowship of the Ring, not all those who wander are lost. And you say, though the line was meant by Gandalf to help Frodo identify Strider, Aragorn, it reminds us of two things. And this is what you were just talking about. First,
Mm-hmm.
wandering is our natural state. And second, navigation isn't always certainty. And I I find that refreshing and to encourage our audience, because sometimes you may think you're aimless, but just pause and be grateful. As the Bible says, this is God's will, that you're thankful in all things. So even though you don't have complete certainty in what job you're going to do, how this is going to unfold, my oldest is heading off to college. He's already got 2 years under his belt, but he's going to finish the other 2 in California. And it's like 3,500 miles away from dad. But it's a beautiful thing, though, to see him become his own man and trust God. But it's also hard. And so we can feel a little aimless or not have complete certainty. But there's so much to be grateful for. There's beauty in this. And I love, like you said, is, you can, and especially Americans, we can fixate on not having a car. And that's all we look at, instead of like, you know what? Because when you were telling me this, I was thinking about the time in my life when my wife and we left a great big church, a good promising career that I loved. I loved the people I worked with. I loved the people I was serving and shepherding. Right. And God was calling us a few years before this about, hey, it's time for you guys now to, and we had, previous 10 years before this, we had left, Tucson, our entire family on both sides, and 2 small kids at like you did, now 4, but we just remember the beauty of serenity, of just knowing that we didn't have all of it planned and figured out, but we just trusted God. And so what I did when to save money and to start building a ministry and raise support, I sold my car. So we had less expenses. Now, of course, I'm a grown man and I have some meetings, and I was being dropped off by my wife and some, and some of my kids in the back, and they're like, "Bye, Daddy. Have a great meeting." And my wife's like, "Text me when you're done, and we'll come pick you up." And here I'm trying to build a ministry and trying to get traction, and my wife's dropping me off, and I'd get upset or feel like, oh my gosh, this is an inconvenience. We got to do this, because then after that we're like, well, we got to go to the store on the way home, and I'm like, no, I got to go right. But then I remember God, it hit me, and I was like, you know what's so beautiful about this is the time that I get to spend with my family, and how they were so supportive and asking me questions about, what are you writing about? What was your meeting about? How did it go, Daddy? And then sometimes we'd go to a park afterwards, and we'd go get some food at a grocery store and go have a picnic. And if I had another car, and those would have been missed opportunities. And like I said, my oldest at the time was 11 or 12. No, he's younger than that. He was 9 or 10, and now he's 19. And I'm like, and the time flies. So I love that. Like you say, we can be wandering, but it's not always a bad thing. And I really appreciate you saying that in the book. Okay, I know you referred to him. He's so many people's heroes when it comes to the Christian faith, and when it comes to just an escape, whether you're reading The Weight of Glory or Screw Tape Letters or the Chronicles of Narnia. But in his classic book, and you and I have talked a lot about The Weight of Glory, and it's probably one of my favorite pieces next to Miracles. But Lewis discusses, obviously, as you were referring to earlier, as beauty, but go a little bit deeper, because so many of us can't get enough of how C.S. Lewis processed not just information, but his outlook on life. And what's one of the go-to portions of The Weight of Glory? And you did mention it, but go a little deeper to how he unpacked beauty in various circumstances and the way he weighted it in life.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned that you've put it next to Miracles. The Grand Miracle chapter in Miracles is one of my all-time favorite chapters in a nonfiction book.
Hey, by the way, let me just, I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm going to tell my audience, let's do a show on that chapter down the road. That'd be awesome.
I would love to. Yeah. Oh, I get goosebumps thinking about that chapter.
Yeah, for my audience to know, you're an expert in the life of C.S. Lewis, because that's what you got your PhD in. So that would be fantastic. Just occasionally on the show, we can explore some of the writings of C.S. Lewis, because
let's do it.
We need to keep a younger generation.
Yeah, let's do it.
There you go. We'll plan on. All right, keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. Oh my word, train of thought. Okay, so one of the I love telling people this, because I don't know that I didn't know this until I've read this. So The Weight of Glory is an essay. It's actually a sermon that he gave in Oxford, and And what's really amazing about The Weight of Glory is he was doing it, I think it was in June. I can't remember the exact date, but it was in June 1941. Oh man, now I'm gonna like people are gonna be like, did you study this or not? In June 1941, he at the same time he was writing, he wrote that, which is it's just a sermon, and he was also in the middle of writing the Screw Tape Letters, which was not a book that he wrote as a book, but he wrote them as weekly articles to a paper, and he was doing the broadcast talks, which became Mere Christianity. Can you imagine
I
the output in that year or so? And then some of the Narnia books he wrote
he
in
was right.
2
Yeah.
months. So he was prolific. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. But what I love about The Weight of Glory is I even asked my wife this. I go, hey babe, what do you think Lewis meant when he was talking about the weight of glory? And a lot of people talk about the weight of glory being that they bring up the Hebrew kavod, and the glory, the word glory has a idea of weight on it, and it's true. But Lewis actually comes out in the essay and says that the weight of glory is actually being known before God. And now you have to read the whole essay to get to where he says that, and what that it's fame, because that's what he's talking about, two types of glory. And the second type he's talking about is fame. And then he says the best fame is fame before God. And that idea is like to be known by God.
Amen.
That you are famous before God. It's so beautiful. That is beautiful itself. Just that idea that like I am known before God and I'm famous before him. And he loves me. And so that gives me confidence. It gives me peace. It settles my anxious heart to know that I am known by him, even when I think I am not, or when things aren't going great for me in my life. So that's one thing. And I mentioned earlier, near the end of it, I actually think it's probably the last couple paragraphs. And I understand the paragraphs and are like almost pages, like a whole page. But he talks about like getting beyond nature. And if you're familiar with Phil Keaggy, years ago, and I mean years ago, I think I was 16 when a CD came out. Remember those? But the CD Beyond Nature came out. It was my favorite CDs when I was young. Just instrumental. And I never actually realized it till much later that that was actually a nod to C.S. Lewis and The Weight of Glory. But he talks about getting beyond nature, and that nature and the pleasures and the wonders that we have in this world are just echoes of who God is himself, and that we can't. And he says it's hard enough now to manage all the pleasures and beauties in the world just now, right? In a fallen world. He goes, imagine what those who've gone on to the other side, those who have passed on into glory itself, imagine what they're experiencing. And he goes, because we all are meant to drink from the fountainhead, right? The torrent, he says it in Latin, but the idea is the torrent of joy, right? We drink this torrent of joy when we pass into glory. It's one of my favorite ideas that, like, we can sit and talk about what heaven's going to be like. I think Lewis, in a lot of his writing, was trying to do that. He does it in Paralandra. I think he hints on it in Out of the Silent Planet. He gives contrastive language to it in That Hideous Strength, right? He talks a little bit about, no, actually not just a little bit. He talks a lot about beauty and aesthetics in The Abolition of Man, but he's always pushing into like that thing beyond. He does it in The Great Divorce, which is about going into heaven, right? And things becoming not hard, but filled with light. And in the end of The Weight of Glory, he's talking about once we pass on, we're just seeing these echoes, these shadows of things that are glimpses. He calls them godlight, right? These things that are just giving us hints of what it's going to be like to be in the presence of God. And when I think about that, I think my mind goes right to Moses, or to anybody in the Old Testament who experienced the theophany, right? Who experienced the divine presence. Most of all, I mean, obviously John in the Revelation, but like Moses, there's something about Moses on that mountain, right? 40 days and nights in the cloud of God. How did he eat? How was he sustained? We don't even know. We can't even fathom that. Like, what about the people who are just taken, right? Taken out of this world. I feel like almost in a sense, Moses kind of was for those 40 days and 40 nights, just in the glory, how it was all sustaining, right? He was drinking from the torrent of joy. And that idea I love so much because in the last battle, um, and I know I'm taking you from the weight of glory into all these other things, but I think that's how this is what Lewis did. He would write about an idea, then he would express it through his fiction, and it was just brilliant. I mean, I can give you a reading list of how to read That Hideous Strength and understand it by reading about four other books of his. But like in the last battle, at the very end of the book, sorry, spoiler alert, last book of the series and last part of the book, um, the kids are going through the door that Aslan opens up for them, right? And they go into the new Narnia and see it again for the first time. And it just keeps expanding, right? And what is Aslan saying? Come further up and further in, right? It's one of his most famous little phrases, which, by the way, on another episode, we can talk about where I feel like he actually took that from, which I haven't told anybody. That's it. That's actually in my thesis. So if you really want to know, you can go read the thesis. But further up and further in, that is Lewis talking about the torrent of joy, about it actually being a place, and the torrent of joy, the fountainhead of joy in heaven. Jesus himself will be the light, right? I've talked to my girls about that. And sorry, I know I get excited and animated about this, but I get so excited
Amen.
about a world where God himself
Yeah.
is the light itself, right? That's mind blowing. And the girls are like, well, will there be any darkness? I'm like, I don't know. I don't think so. Why would we need darkness anymore? Everything's going to be totally different. And I was just reading today in First Corinthians a commentary about how we think we know what we're going to be like with our heavenly bodies or what it's going to be like, but we can only grasp at it. And I think that's it. That's what Lewis is really getting at in The Weight of Glory at the very end when he's talking about, he's pointing us to these beautiful pleasures of life and going, it's just a glimpse. It's just a glimpse of it. And at one and then he ends with what we can do in our life right now is be that glimpse of heaven to other people. That's how he ends the essay, right? He's like, we need to be that to our fellow man, our fellow Christians, and the people who don't know of heaven, that we can be that godlight for them. I just feel like that is so amazing and so inspiring. And I am still peeling back the layers of The Weight of Glory. It's I feel like it's one of the best Christian pieces of literature written in probably the last several hundred years. So,
well, I mean, obviously, and to encourage people on that note, Tim, to read Weight of Glory if they've never have read that book, and of course, make sure that you guys also read Beauty Chasers, that Tim wrote, but I think I'll choose C.S. Lewis sometimes over my buddy Tim. Because I know you would too, buddy.
I would too, yeah.
But no, I appreciate it. And I think even just what you've encapsulated there is just ways for people to be encouraged if they have become unmindful or unappreciative. You've ignored or disregarded. I know sometimes when we're in the midst of pain or there's something troubling us. We were just talking to my wife and I were counseling a couple recently. They, kind of their new phase of ministry, and it's not going well at all. But it was amazing that even in the midst of these accusations that he was facing and being, again, accused of things he hadn't done, and his integrity was on the line, he felt the peace of God in the midst of it, and there's beauty there to be in his presence. And I love, when Psalm 42 and Dave was talking about as a deer pants after water, so my soul pants after you, oh God. And and when can I go be with the Lord was a question that David, constantly posed before his own soul, because that's where he ultimately found refuge. And so I just encourage Tim for people to get his book, Beauty Chasers, and also to make sure you guys check out The Weight of Glory. Where can they find you, Tim, for more information about you and your ministry?
Yeah, you can go to timothywillard.com. There's places there to sign up for my newsletter. I'm really active on Instagram. I really love that medium. And I'm on Substack as well. And my newsletter on Substack is, wait for it, Further Up.
There you
That's what my
go.
newsletter is called. So Timothy Willard at Substack is further up. So those are 3 places you can find me.
Well, I appreciate you, Tim. Thank you for coming on, and I just pray that God will continue to use your book.
Thanks, brother.
All right, man. God bless you. Well, my friends, thanks for listening to the show. I hope this episode has opened your eyes to seeing God in his creation and to be more sensitive to his beauty that is all around you. As Tim said, you can go to timwillard.com to purchase his book, and there's other books that he has written that are available, and also more information about his ministry. If this show is helping you stand strong in your faith, please tell us by leaving a review wherever you listen to this podcast. I'd greatly appreciate it. Until next time, keep having those challenging conversations.